Before there was Google, before there was a roadmap to everything you ever wanted to know, there was chaos. The internet existed, but finding anything on it, that was a different story. Search engines of the 1990s, Yahoo, AltaVista, Lycos, returned results based on how many times a keyword appeared on a page. Game the system with enough repetition, and your site shot to the top. Truth, relevance, quality, none of it mattered. But in the leafy corridors of Stanford University, two graduate students were asking a different kind of question. Not, how do we make search faster, but how do we make search smarter? Their names were Larry Page and Sergey Brin, and the answer they found would change everything. Lawrence Edward Page was born on March 26, 1973, in East Lansing, Michigan. His father, Carl Page, was one of the first people in the country to earn a PhD in computer science. His mother taught computer programming. Larry Page didn't grow up near computers. He grew up inside them. At 6 years old, Page was already the first kid in his elementary school to turn in a word processed assignment. He once said, "I think I always wanted to be an inventor." What he didn't know yet was that his greatest invention would not be hardware. It would be an idea about how knowledge itself should be organized. Sergey Mihailovich Brin's story begins in a different kind of world. Born in Moscow on August 21, 1973, Brin grew up in a Jewish family in the Soviet Union, a time and place where anti-Semitism was not just social prejudice, but state policy. His father, Mikhail Brin, was a mathematics professor who dreamed of a career in astronomy. The Soviet government told him that career was unavailable to Jews. In 1979, when Sergey was 6 years old, the family made the dangerous and difficult choice to emigrate to the United States. His father would later say that he hoped America would give his son a chance to live a full life. Years later, on a trip back to Moscow as an adult, Sergey Brin would say that trip crystallized for him how the Soviet environment could crush the human spirit, and that it instilled in him a lifelong obsession with the free flow of information. Both men arrived at Stanford's computer science PhD program in the early 1990s. Legend has it that they didn't much like each other at first. Sergey was extroverted, opinionated, quick to debate. Larry was quieter, more measured, deeply internal. They argued constantly, but their arguments were productive. Two razor-sharp minds, colliding in real time. In 1996, Larry Page became obsessed with an unlikely topic: the link structure of the World Wide Web. The question he kept returning to was this: when one website links to another, what does that say about the site being linked to? Think about how academic research works. If a professor's paper is cited by 1,000 other papers, that paper probably matters. If it's cited by nobody, it's probably not very important. Page had a radical insight. The same logic could apply to the web. Links weren't just navigation tools, they were votes. And the quality of who voted for you mattered just as much as how many votes you got. With Brin's mathematical genius backing him up, Page developed an algorithm they initially called backrub because it analyzed the backlinks pointing to any given page. They built a web crawler that would download massive chunks of the internet and map its link relationships. It was so hungry for data that it eventually used up nearly half of Stanford's entire internet bandwidth. The results were astonishing. When they typed a query into backrub, the pages that rose to the top were genuinely more relevant than anything AltaVista or Yahoo had ever returned. They knew they had something. The question was, what would they do with it? They renamed the project Google, a deliberate misspelling of Google, the mathematical term for 10 to the power of 100. It was a declaration of intent. They were building a search engine for a near-infinite web. The name stuck. In August 1998, they got their first major break. Andy Bechtolsheim, one of the co-founders of Sun Microsystems, watched a quick demo of Google at a friend's porch. He didn't ask many questions. He pulled out his checkbook and wrote a check for $100,000. Made out to Google Incorporated, there was one problem. Google Incorporated didn't exist yet. They scrambled to incorporate the company. On September 4, 1998, Google LLC was officially born. Their first office was a rented garage in Menlo Park, owned by a woman named Susan Wojcicki, who would later become CEO of YouTube. The team was 4 people. The equipment was secondhand. The mission was enormous. In those early days, the servers that Google ran on were partly assembled from Lego bricks, because Lego was cheap, modular, and made it easy to add more hard drives. It was a perfect metaphor for the entire company, built from parts that weren't supposed to go together, making something that no one expected to work. By early 1999, Google was handling 500,000 search queries a day. They hadn't even officially launched. Word was spreading through Silicon Valley like wildfire. This search engine actually gave you what you were looking for. Students at Stanford used it. Professors used it. Tech workers started talking. In 1999, Larry Page and Sergey Brin set out to raise serious venture capital. They walked into meetings with some of the most powerful investors in Silicon Valley and made made demands that were almost unprecedented. They wanted money, yes, but they also wanted to retain control of the company completely. No investors on the board, no interference with the algorithm. They didn't need your advice. They needed your check. Most investors said no, but two firms, Sequoia Capital and Kleiner Perkins, said yes. Together, they invested $25 million. It was the first time these two legendary rival firms had ever co-invested in the same company. The deal came with one condition. Page and Brin needed to hire a professional CEO. They were resistant. They famously interviewed dozens of candidates, many of whom they dismissed almost immediately. Then they met Eric Schmidt. He was the CEO of Novell, had a PhD in computer science, and most importantly, he understood engineers. He spoke their language. He built things. He could argue with them. After months of negotiation, Schmidt became Google's CEO in 2001. The unusual trio, Schmidt, Page, and Brin, would guide the company through one of the most explosive growth periods in corporate history. For the first few years of Google's existence, the company had no clear revenue model. They had traffic, millions of searches a day. They had relevance, unmatched search quality. What they didn't have was a sustainable way to make money. And they had a philosophical problem with advertising as it existed in 2000. The web in 2000 was drowning in banner ads, pop-ups, flashing graphics. Sites sold their best real estate to the highest bidder, regardless of relevance. AltaVista and Overture had even begun selling search result placements. The more you paid, the higher your site ranked. Page and Brin found this morally repugnant. They had written in their original academic paper that advertising-funded search engines will be inherently biased toward advertisers and away from the needs of consumers. And yet, they found a way to do it cleanly. In 2000, Google launched AdWords. The concept was elegant. Advertisers could bid on keywords. But unlike the banner ad model, the ads were text-only, clearly labeled, and, crucially, ranked not just by how much you paid, but by how relevant and high-quality your ad was. Low-quality ads got penalized. Relevant ads that users clicked on got rewarded. The genius of AdWords was that it aligned incentives. Advertisers only paid when someone actually clicked. Google only earned money when users found ads useful. Relevance was literally monetized. By 2002, AdWords was generating revenue at a pace that stunned the industry. By 2004, Google would generate $1.5 billion in annual revenue. The most valuable real estate on earth had turned out to be a text box. On April 29, 2004, Google filed to go public, but they didn't follow the usual rules. Instead of the traditional roadshow where executives court institutional investors, Page and Brin included something extraordinary in their IPO filing, a personal letter to potential shareholders titled An Owner's Manual for Google's Shareholders. In it, they wrote that Google was not a conventional company and they did not intend to become one. They declared that they would make decisions based on long-term impact rather than quarterly earnings. They would not give guidance to Wall Street analysts. They introduced a dual-class share structure that meant they and Schmidt would retain majority voting control even after going public. They were essentially telling investors, you can own a piece of this, but we're still driving. Wall Street was baffled. Fund managers were offended. The IPO itself was conducted as a Dutch auction, letting ordinary people, not just institutional investors, bid on shares. It was chaotic. The offering was priced at $85 per share in August 2004, below initial estimates. The media called it a stumble. Within 18 months, Google's stock would hit $400 a share. The skeptics went quiet. On April 1, 2004, April Fool's Day, Google announced Gmail. The tech press assumed it was a joke. Google was offering 1 gigabyte of email storage at a time when Hotmail offered 2 megabytes. That's 500 times more storage for free. People thought it had to be a prank. It wasn't. Gmail upended the email industry overnight. Microsoft and Yahoo scrambled to increase their storage limits. But Gmail's advantage wasn't just space. It was search. For the first time, you could search your own email the way you search the web. Every conversation became findable, retrievable, permanent. Your inbox became a database. In October 2006, Google made the acquisition that would define the next decade of the internet. They bought YouTube, a 20-month-old startup, for $1.65 billion in stock. Many analysts called it insane. YouTube had no real revenue, significant legal exposure from copyright lawsuits, and massive bandwidth costs. What Google saw was something different. They saw the future of television. Not television as it existed, scheduled, passive, controlled, but television as it could be. User-generated, on-demand, globally distributed. Today, YouTube has over 2.7 billion logged-in users per month. More content is uploaded to YouTube every day than all 3 major American TV networks produced in their first 30 years combined. When Apple unveiled the iPhone in January 2007, Google's leadership understood immediately what it meant. meant. The future of computing would not live on the desktop, it would live in people's pockets. And if Google didn't have a presence on mobile, it risked being cut out of the biggest platform shift since the invention of the web. Google had already acquired a small company called Android Incorporated in 2005 for a reported $50 million. Almost nobody in the tech press paid attention, but Larry Page had noticed something. Android was building an open-source mobile operating system, a phone platform that any hardware maker could use, customize, and distribute. It was the exact opposite of Apple's closed model. Today, Android runs on over 3 billion active devices worldwide. It powers phones in rural Kenya, suburban Brazil, urban Tokyo, and small-town Indiana alike. What Google understood, and what many of its critics missed, was that Google doesn't need to win by selling the most expensive device. It wins by being inside the most devices. Android was a Trojan horse, and the payload was Google. By 2004, Google's headquarters in Mountain View had become legendary. Free food, on-site doctors, gym facilities, laundry services, massage therapists, shuttle buses with Wi-Fi. The Googleplex was not a workplace. It was an ecosystem designed to ensure that the world's smartest people never had a reason to leave. But behind the foosball tables and the free sushi, there was a serious philosophy at work. Page and Brin believed that the key to great products was retaining the intensity of a startup even as the company scaled. One of the tools they developed was the concept of 20% time, the idea that every engineer could spend 20% of their working hours on any project they chose, regardless of whether it aligned with their official job description. Gmail, a 20% project. Google Maps, born from a side team's obsession. Google News, sparked by September 11th and one engineer's weekend experiment. The culture of experimentation was not accidental. It was engineered as deliberately as the search algorithm itself. For years, Google's unofficial corporate motto was "Don't be evil." It was written into their code of conduct. It was said in meetings. It was quoted in press articles. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the world started asking whether Google was living up to it. The company that was founded on the free flow of information found itself accused of controlling it. The company that despised the manipulation of search results was sued repeatedly for manipulating search results in favor of its own products. The company that promised not to track users built one of the most sophisticated user tracking systems in human history, powering an advertising business worth hundreds of billions of dollars. In 2006, Google made the decision to launch Google.cn, a censored version of search for the Chinese market. Results about Tiananmen Square, Tibet, and Falun Gong were suppressed at the request of the Chinese government. Page and Brin justified it as a less bad approach. A censored Google was better than no Google. Human rights groups disagreed loudly. Then, in 2010, after a sophisticated cyber attack that appeared to be state-sponsored and appeared to target Chinese human rights activists using Gmail, Google made a dramatic announcement. They would stop censoring results and would redirect Chinese users to an uncensored Hong Kong server. It was a direct confrontation with one of the world's most powerful governments. Google essentially got kicked out of China's market. Baidu filled the vacuum. By 2023, the chickens had come home to roost. The United States Department of Justice brought a landmark antitrust case against Google, alleging that the company had illegally maintained its monopoly on search by paying billions of dollars, upward of $10 billion a year, to be the default search engine on Apple devices, Samsung phones, and Mozilla Firefox. In 2024, a federal judge ruled Google had broken the law. The remedy, what the government could actually do about it, was still being debated. On August 10, 2015, Larry Page announced one of the most surprising corporate restructurings in history. Google, as a company, would cease to exist in its current form. Instead, it would become a subsidiary of a new holding company called Alphabet Incorporated. Page would become CEO of Alphabet. Sundar Pichai, a quiet, brilliant engineer who had risen through the ranks, would become CEO of Google. The logic was clean. Google, the search engine and advertising business, was enormously profitable. But Page and Brin wanted to pursue projects that had nothing to do with search: self-driving cars, anti-aging research, drone delivery, stratospheric internet balloons. These moonshots needed a different corporate structure. Alphabet would be the umbrella. Google would be the cash cow that funded the experiments. On August 10, 2015, Larry Page announced one of the most surprising corporate restructurings in history. Google, as a company, would cease to exist in its current form. Instead, it would become a subsidiary of a new holding company called Alphabet Incorporated. Page would become CEO of Alphabet. Sundar Pichai, a quiet, brilliant engineer who had risen through the ranks, would become CEO of Google. The logic was clean. Google, the search engine and advertising business, was enormously profitable. But Page and Brin wanted to pursue two projects that had nothing to do with search: self-driving cars, anti-aging research, drone delivery, stratospheric internet balloons. These moonshots needed a different corporate structure. Alphabet would be the umbrella. Google would be the cash cow that funded the experiments. In December 2022, OpenAI released ChatGPT. Within 2 months, it had 100 million users, the fastest consumer technology adoption in history. And Google, for the first time, heard a word that had never been used to describe it before: vulnerable. The irony was acute. Google had been doing artificial intelligence research for years, longer and deeper than almost any company in the world. DeepMind had been a Google subsidiary since 2014. The transformer architecture that powered ChatGPT itself was invented by researchers at Google Brain. And yet, it was OpenAI, backed by Microsoft, that had moved fastest to put AI in front of consumers. Google declared a code red. Larry Page, who had stepped back from day-to-day operations, was reportedly back in the building for emergency meetings. The company moved at a pace it hadn't moved in years. Gemini, Google's answer to GPT-4, launched in 2023. AI overviews were integrated into search. The classic 10 blue links, the product that had defined the web for 25 years, was being redesigned. The question that hangs over Silicon Valley today is the same question that Larry Page first asked in a dorm room in 1996. How should human beings find what they need to know? For a quarter century, Google wrote the answer. Now, for the first time, that answer is being rewritten. Consider what the world looked like before Google. Research meant going to a library. Medical information meant waiting for a doctor. News meant waiting for a newspaper. Directions meant a paper map or a phone call. Arguments about facts were never fully settled because who could really know? Google didn't just make search faster. It changed humanity's relationship with knowledge. It made information, for the first time in the history of our species, instantly accessible to nearly anyone, anywhere on Earth. That is not a small thing. That is a civilizational change. And it was built by two graduate students who thought links could work like citations in a garage in Menlo Park, California. Larry Page once described the perfect search engine as something that understood exactly what you meant and gave you exactly what you wanted. They haven't built that, not yet. But in trying to, they built something almost as extraordinary. A company that rewired how the world thinks, that reshaped curiosity itself into an industry. Whatever comes next, whatever the AI era brings, whatever the antitrust courts decide, whatever the next generation of founders builds in the next garage, the story of Google is not a business story. It is a story about what happens when two people ask the right question and refuse, absolutely refuse, to accept a bad answer.